For our next talk, we have Jonathon Reid, who will be talking about can Copilot transform your build, like it did for him. Jonathon is a lead software engineer at Mantel Group with about 10 plus years of experience in development. And his favorite ice cream flavor is waiting there. Yes. Over to you.
Hello. Hi, as mentioned, my name is Jonathon Reid. I'm a software chief engineer with Mantel Group, and today I'll be talking about how Copilot is going to help that big for me. So, to give you some context, about 4 or 5 months ago, I started studying Python well. I didn't want to eat anything, I had all some clothing, study programs, all that kind of thing. I just figured out what was happening. So, it took about 5 or 6 weeks of just test after test after test, finally figured out that I had Celiac. So
This is spoiler.
So what is Celiac disease? So it's a genetic autoimmune disease suffered by about 1% of the population. So it's relatively quite common, so you might know something else with it. So to stop with it, not using gluten that damaging our body. So even trace amounts, so cross-contamination, for example, can cause quite a severe reaction. And gluten is primarily found in things like wheat, barley, rye, and oats. So all those things on the right, the slightly red, making very hungry. It's also had a lot of processed food. A lot of sauces or marinades or processed things kind of packaging. A lot of it actually contains gluten, so it's usually like a binding agent, as the name suggests, it has gluten together. So why am I talking about celiac disease at a conference? Well, it turns out that label reading is actually really hard. So that's an example on the right. This one played a medium difficulty. So raise your hand if you think there's gluten in this product. There's a few hands there. So for the rest, if you had celiac, would you feel comfortable eating this thing? Probably not, right? So it's actually quite complicated. So for example, there's a whole lot of things on there which don't really well enough to know what they are. Like one is sodium glutamate. You might think it says glutamate, it's gluten in it, but it actually doesn't. For those you might know, monosodium glutamate is actually MSG, the very controversial flavor in enzyme. So yeah, reading labels is actually quite difficult. And that's one thing I need to do constantly. So when I'm in calls, or you might see me standing at a label on my phone, Googling every single ingredient. You're like, is this gluten free? Is this gluten free? Sometimes it's too hard and it's fun. So surely there's an easier way. I work in tech space, so it's repetitive, laborious tasks. Probably there's one way to automate this. I also work in app space, so I had a great app idea that everyone does. But I don't actually do much software development, if any, outside of my normal day job. So I thought I don't have a lot of time, I don't necessarily want to sit on my weekends learning something. So why don't I try to pick up Copilot, see what I can do to make that a lot easier. And here comes the gluten detector app. So I use Google MlKit to read the text of a label product. Then use Copilot to generate some regexes, which strip each individual ingredient out of that file list. You compare that against the known gluten sources, or possible sources in some ingredients and video as well. And in the end, about 90% of the code generated for this app was actually generated by Copilot. And it probably took about, in terms of dev hours, about 4 or 5 hours to actually get this MVP up and running. I'll show you a quick demo soon. So it's able to launch camera, use Google MlKit to read the ingredients off the list, pass like that, and then generate a UI list with the different sources and whether they contain gluten, possible contain, or safe. So this is an example where it's reading off the list. It then creates this nice UI that has categorized into the 3 areas. And then it gives you a high-level contained statement at the top whether it is safe or not. So it looks fairly simple, but I think there's loading the camera view, panel permissions, doing all the regex, business logic, and then displaying that on the UI. Again, for 4 or 5 hours, I can pretty good. So for those who aren't familiar with Copilot, this will be an example of how it works in Android Studio. So in this example, there'll just be a method signature, so just the name of the method, input parameter, and the output. And this Copilot is able to provide some documentation around what the more detailed intent of that method is. I'll give it more zoom in scenario example afterwards if you can't see it. And then given that content documentation, it's able to generate the implementation as well using existing methods. It's also able to think about the order of how these should happen and then provide the expected outcome. And if you want some more detailed documentation in this scenario, I've asked it to generate some more and generate it. I'll click the buttons now to solve it. So this is a more zoomed example. So you can see that initially you can highlight an overview of what the function does, and then in the middle gives you a detailed step-by-step implementation of what is happening, and then at the end gives you some more details around the input parameter and the output parameter and what they represent. Again, this is solely off the process background text with the input text and boolean return. Copilot is able to look at what else is in this file and other files that are open to generate some context around what the intent is. So I think that was pretty impressive. So the good thing saw generating new code based off prompts and other tiers implementation of regular expressions. Copilot was actually quite good. And it didn't need a whole lot of context or a whole lot of prompting, like detailed prompting to kind of get it where it needed to be. It's also quite good at training data classes and skeleton compose UIs, where you get about 80% of the way, and then you kind of mass out the last 20% is exactly what you need. So it does take quite a bit of time for that tedious rework like work, which is you kind of end up doing over and over again. It's also quite good at understanding different branches in a flow, and not necessarily just like an if-else statement, but the context of when that would happen. And especially this is valuable when you create unit tests. So it's able to create unit tests, which I'll give some examples in the next slide, around what is there, what could possibly be there, and different scenarios that might not necessarily trigger a different branch, but would be a scenario, for example, duplicate ingredients in a list, which doesn't necessarily go to a different flow, but is a legitimate use case you would want to test. And one thing I definitely noticed was so Copilot looks at what files are open and uses that as a reference. So whether you had, for example, a build or build file open, so that would look at what libraries have access to, or for example, if the manifest was open, it was able to know whether you have permissions or not. So which files are open in that context in Android Studio made a massive difference. The more you had open, the more accurate the output was. So this is an example where it looked at what test cases were covered, so there's 4 here, and then there's another 4 which it suggests. You can't see in the screenshot, but there's also code examples, which do provide the sample content, like input, that would trigger the flow, the invocation, and then the expected outcome. So they're not so good. So Android specific concepts like permission or lifecycle awareness, it didn't always get. If I prompted it subsequent times, it would understand and know what to do. But initially, for example, the camera view, it didn't mention anything about adding permissions. So obviously I added the camera view, I opened the app, and nothing happened. So I didn't have permissions. Or for example, when you're collecting a flow in the compose, you collect a state. Obviously, if you use Android, you collect a state of lifecycle. So that next level of detail that Copilot doesn't necessarily get, and all those Android specific nuances. So one of the funny parts that you have was when I asked it if it could make the UI a bit more compose friendly, and it created this company's camera library out of nothing. It created build imports, versioning, a compose view, everything, but that library doesn't exist. So for those of people who aren't necessarily familiar with what is and isn't out there, it can kind of lead you down a hole of trying to fix the issue when the issue is that the library doesn't exist in the first place. One of the drawbacks of Copilot being a plugin for Android Studio as well is that it can't seem to generate new files. So if you have a class, you want to generate test files for that, it gives you all the code you need to test that class, but it doesn't seem to actually be able to pick a file in the first place. Whereas in Visual Studio Code, you can, so I think it's one of the downsides of just being a plugin. Also, when I try to simplify some of the code, just sometimes just strip functionality out of it directly. So just be careful when you are simplifying it, that it actually still does the same thing as your intention. So you currently one of GenAI for GDG festival. So there's still, I guess, some concern around data privacy. I primarily work in enterprise space. So a lot of things like a lot of banking, insurance, that might be a bit more conscious around that. And a lot of enterprises already have Copilot licenses and approvals from their internal security teams. So given that Copilot, there is a demo I can use there, but there it is. Given that Copilot can be used in a lot of backend systems as well, that is kind of a broader breadth of what the value that Copilot can generate and helps get the approval through. It also seems overall a bit more of a mature platform, but I think that Gemini has a bit more unrealized potential in terms of it has tight integration with Android Studio and with Android overall. So Copilot the verdict. So probably about 80 to 90% of the code, of the auto-generated code, is useful and gets you there. So I think people often think that AI will either do absolutely nothing for you or absolutely everything for you. Whereas in reality, it's like it's about 80% of the way there. And then as engineers, it's still up to us to kind of figure out what that last 20% is. It's also very effective at unit test generation. So from my understanding, the last time I looked at especially Google I/O, Gemini was able to create the methods for the different branches for a unit test, but wasn't actually able to generate implementation of that. Whereas Copilot is able to give you the sample data, which wouldn't be needed for each test. So it essentially does everything for you. As I mentioned, simplifying a little bit risky because it just ground strips functionality. And also, yeah, it's pretty easy for enterprise employees, given it's part of GitHub and part of Microsoft. I had my Mantel license, I just logged in and then it just worked. So it's quite a low barrier for those people who do have access to it already. And it also has quite a lot of access controls and all that kind of thing, so it's much more enterprise friendly. And for me personally, I wouldn't have built a gluten detector app without it, because it probably saved me hours and not days with effort to generate it. Yeah, especially if anyone has used a Redx, you know that, yeah, it's never that simple. So that's it for me. So that's how Copilot can power you to take control of your health, like it did for me.
Any questions?
Can you completely trust the character recognition when you're in the supermarket with the ingredients? Do you put full trust in that it detects a certain ingredient?
I think that side is pretty good, but yeah, definitely not full trust. For example, if there's like reflection of the lighting in that certain area, that kind of thing is definitely not necessarily 100%. Also, some of the formatting labels isn't necessarily consistent. So, for example, a product that's labeled in Australia but it's labeled overseas. So definitely not 100%, but not how it is at the moment.
So you use it to rule something out, but not to fully trust it to use something. You just, like if you found a box of cereal that has an ingredient that you're allergic to, you'd rule it out with your app. But yes, if you wouldn't actually eat it, you would still check.
Yeah, it's a much easier way to look at, it might be 20, 30 ingredients in there, at least one of them is contains gluten. But if I said everything was fine, I probably still may look at it myself as well. There's a much easier way to just rule out things rather than having to look at everything, then the last ingredient you look at.
Do you think we're far off from being able to completely trust?
I think it's two sides to it. The number one is the just like image recognition and actually reading the data, which I think is pretty good, but yeah, definitely not 100%. The other side is like having a data source that is accurate, because labeling laws change depending when the product was packaged and the year the product was packaged. So it's actually quite complicated as well. But yeah, in 2026, the labeling laws change again, which would make it a lot simpler as well.